Hi, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you might be. My name is John Curry. I'm one of the advisors here. So today's webinar is really about teaching in Europe, and I'll try and cover as much as I possibly can. Europe, it might be a small continent, but we've got a lot of countries, so there's a lot of different systems, a lot of different requirements, different laws regarding working in Europe. If you have any questions, so basically what I want to do is try and make this as efficient and get to as many people's questions as possible today. If you do have any specific questions about working in Europe, feel free to pop them into the messages from now on. I'll keep an eye on them and I'll try and address them as I go through the webinar. If I can't get through to them during it, I'll do my best to come back and answer them at the end. I'll also give you my email address. So if you have any questions afterwards, you can always send in an email to me and I'll do my best to follow up for you. Okay. So if anybody does have any questions initially, feel free to start popping them in. If there's a particular country you're looking to work in, so if you can pop in information like where you'd like to work and perhaps the country you're coming from as well. Okay. Great. We do seem to have quite a few people. South Africa, France, England, also Spain, to Spain together. Super. Okay. I think we have pretty much everybody who's going to be here. Okay, Spain. Spain, Italy, Greece. Eastern Europe, South Africa. I'm just going to jot down a few little notes so I don't forget. Okay. I think I've got most of those covered anyway, so okay. Okay, unfortunately, we won't get China, Cambodia, USA today. I might be able to get back to Cambodia for you at the end. I might be able to do something there. Super. Okay, Jonathan, that's a good question. Difference between teaching in Europe and Southeast Asia. Okay. Mission. I'll come back to that. Spain. Okay. Okay, keep the countries coming in. If it's okay with you, I'm just going to start because I have a kind of a bit of a restricted timetable today, unfortunately, but I'll do my best to cover everything. Um, okay, so we've got a lot of countries in there, and I think I've managed to predict most of them. So essentially, as I say, teaching in Europe, um, just in the European Union, we're looking at 27 countries. Uh, Even though there are general EU rules that run across all of the countries, each country will also have its own little schemes and its requirements in terms of work. So I'll try my best to get through them. There's a couple of different things within Europe as well. There is a bit of a north-south split and an east-west split as well in terms of working in countries. So most people here seem to be more interested from sort of France, Italy, Spain. Uh, um, I think we had Greece in there as well. So that's kind of the area I was about to focus on. We'll do a little comparison if I can there as well. Eastern Europe as well. We'll certainly cover those. So essentially, most of the jobs in Northern Europe, and I'm going to kind of draw a line, an artificial line across. I'm going to kind of put sort of Germany, Netherlands, and north of that line into a certain category. The jobs in that part of Europe tend to be better paid. There is a higher cost of living as well with it. The conditions are different and the types of teaching quite often are different. I haven't taught in Germany, but I have taught in Scandinavia. Um, you will tend to find that a lot of the opportunities within teaching in those countries are on the sort of professional level. And by that, I mean within sort of business areas, ESP, English for specific purposes. There tends to be less of the lower level work because the state school systems tend to do such a good job at teaching languages. So by the time most people come out, they're already quite fluent in English. So it tends to be specialized. When we're looking at the other countries, um, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece, and to a lesser degree France, you will find that the jobs tend to be more with the language schools. They tend to be privately owned. I'll come back to those in a little bit, but that's just kind of a rough divide. Your age ranges when you're working at those schools could be anywhere from 4 years old right up to retirement age. Okay. Excuse me, one moment. I'll finally getting rid of a chest infection throat problem I've had for about 4 months, but it's not completely gone. So, for those people who are looking at working in Europe and coming from outside, um, and it's a question we get a lot. The answer is yes, you can work in Europe. However, it can be quite complex simply because you need visas. Okay. There really isn't much of a way around. So the visa process um, for working within Europe, and I'm kind of focusing on the European Union here because it's what I would know best. Um, so anyone from the UK, US, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, etc., you tend really you need to have a job lined up, and your potential employer, your new employer, has to be prepared to say they're sponsoring you within the position. It's not a particularly easy thing to do. Um, it'll depend on where you're going to teach. If you're teaching at a university, if you're teaching at one of the larger language companies that provide training, especially again, I'll go kind of that false divide of the north south, especially in the northern parts. It tends to be easier for them to do it. The schools in the rest of Europe tend to be smaller. The majority are family owned, and they simply don't have the resource to go into all the sponsoring and all the paperwork that goes with it. And they have to justify giving you a position as opposed to an EU citizen. They have to be able to prove that they couldn't find somebody within the EU to do the same job. Okay. It's not that it can't be done, it's just it can be quite time consuming and costly for small schools to have to go that route. Um, so yes, it can be done, and I do know teachers who've done it. There is another route for people. So as I say, Australia, New Zealand, US, UK, for historical reasons, would have been lands where quite a few people would have emigrated to. That can be very advantageous to you as a potential employee within the European Union, simply because you may be able to get a hold of a European passport through Ancestry. Okay. I speak quite often to people who are doing this, and I've also advised people who never thought of it. If you trace back, if any of your family would have come from any of the 27 EU member states, you should really be looking at contacting the embassy of that country because they will all have different ways of accepting applications for people who might be looking for citizenship and a passport through Ancestry. I know quite a few people, obviously, in the UK. and the US and Australia, and to perhaps a lesser extent New Zealand and South Africa, they would have had Irish ancestry somewhere. And I do know at least three people I know personally are going through the process of getting an Irish passport through Ancestry. Once you have a European passport, and it doesn't have to be Irish, it can be any one of the 27 states. Once you have a passport from the 27 states, you are entitled to live, work, travel, settle, buy property, and do anything else you would like as an EU citizen in any one of the 27 states. Okay, so you have equal rights. Um, the work schedules, and again, I think most people are looking at sort of the France, Italy, Spain, Portugal line. Work schedules in schools, when they're the smaller language schools, they tend to be a sort of mid-late afternoon up to 9, 10 o'clock at night, simply because that's when the schools are out and it's after people work. So your work schedules normally, timetable wise, you're probably looking in and around 25 to 29 hours per week in terms of teaching. The schedules in bigger schools, you may find, and again, I'm doing the false north-south divide, Northern Europe, you may find it easier to find daytime work, sort of 9 to 5, with some of the bigger schools because they will have more clients, a lot of them being corporate clients. Um, you will find occasionally with the smaller schools, it's just because they are so small, they need people to be flexible. You may have a split shift where you might go in and teach from 9 till 10 or 10 to 11 in the morning, and then come back at 4 or 5 in the afternoon and finish your shift that way. Also, occasionally, you may have to do a Saturday morning because sometimes the kids aren't available, free after schools for whatever reason. Sometimes it's adults. You may have to do a couple of hours on maybe a 1 and 4, 1 and 3 Saturday for others. Generally speaking, if you're in the EU, regardless of where you are, once you're working, you will be paying tax. You will be contributing to the social welfare system and the social insurance. So your healthcare, again, 27 states, 27 systems. Generally speaking, your access to healthcare is free once you're working in the European Union. If you're an EU citizen, obviously, you have the same rights as every other EU citizen. So if you're a French citizen working in Spain, you have equal access to the health systems, etc., within Spain. Okay. Generally pay is monthly, and the pay is one of the questions that's probably the most common question: is how much do you get paid? The answer is normally, I would say, and this is just my own experience. I've worked in Portugal and Spain and Turkey and a few other countries within Europe. Pay tends to be above what you would expect someone in the country to be paid. Partly it's because the schools need the best teachers they can get, so they do have to pay a reasonable rate for the teacher. But the second thing is, if a teacher finds that they're struggling at the end of every month to make ends meet, TEFL is very transient. What you're going to find is the teacher's going to pack up and go, and that leaves the school high and dry. Okay. So most schools are realistic and they're fair with their teachers. They will pay a reasonable rate. Some will pay extra. I had a great guy I worked for in Portugal who was extremely generous. He appreciated the extra work I did. I think in my first year I had 4 pay raises. It's the only time it's ever happened, unfortunately. Um, but because they're small schools, they build relationships not just with the teachers, but they have relationships with the students and the parents because they know them. A lot of them are friends. They go to the same clubs. They might support the same football team and so on. Okay. So it's a very familial sort of feeling to your job. Um, Private work is something I'm going to flag simply because it does come up occasionally. The normal rule when you're working for the school is you do not do private work outside unless the school have okayed it to a certain limit. If they do okay it, the one rule is please never take a student from the school that's paying your salary. It's a big no-no. TEFL is a very strange world to work in a good way. simply because if you get a bad name, it won't take 24 hours to travel through the whole TEFL community. People, you'll go for another job the other side of the world. I guarantee you, somebody will pick up the phone or send an email or make call us, a Zoom session together. Within 5 minutes, they'll have found out that this guy took students from the school and taught them privately. Okay. So just be aware, even though sometimes students will ask you to teach privately, refuse politely. Okay. It's your reputation at the end of the day, and you don't want to spoil it. The second question, probably second most common question I get asked is accommodation. Do schools pay or supply or accommodation for us? The general answer to that would be no. Those days tend to be gone. Very rarely in Europe will a school even have accommodation to offer student teachers. They may put you up for a few days at a B&B. They might even put you up in their own home for the first few days until you find somewhere to live. But generally, accommodation is something you have to factor in when you're looking at your pay. Okay. Um, Eastern Europe was one of the areas that we were asked to look at. So Eastern Europe, um, again, in a way, it's a bit of a false line, but generally speaking, Eastern Europe, there is a demand. There definitely is a demand. Again, the pay tends to be slightly better than the local average for the same kind of work. Um, it really depends on where it is that you're looking to go. Um, I would say Poland has always had a very, very strong TEFL market. I'm not as up on the Baltic states. Um, Prague was probably the number one magnet, along with probably Warsaw, for probably the first 10 years that TEFL really took off. It's since expanded. I do know Albania seems to be calling out for teachers. There seems to be huge opportunities in Albania. I'm not an expert on it, but I did hear from somebody that I think even US citizens would be welcome to work in Albania. I think they can stay visa free for a year or two. So TEFL it's an ever shifting market. New things open up all the time. When I started, and that's a very long time ago, I was told, I was getting in at the right time because the bubble would burst in 5 years. A few years after that, China market opened up, and where we used to see ads for 4 or 5 or 6 jobs at a school, which would have been considered huge, we started seeing ads for 500 teachers at a time. And that would be just one agency, and that's just how big it gets. It's one of the biggest fields of business in the world because everybody uses it. If you have someone from Germany selling into France, they tend to use English. If someone from France is selling to Colombia, they will tend to use English. So there's a huge scope out there. Somebody mentioned Cambodia and also Southeast Asia. I guess the easiest way to describe that would be culture. It's as big a difference teaching in Europe or teaching in Southeast Asia as is the cultures. And again, it's a general thing. If you think Spanish culture is nowhere near similar to German culture, but it's European. So I'm sure Cambodian culture and Vietnamese are totally different. But I think it's probably if you're from Europe and you're going out from the States or going out to Southeast Asia, if you're not familiar with the culture, that will be your biggest challenge to start with because your classroom environment will not be what you experienced growing up with, or even if you'd been teaching, let's say in Europe, that would be your biggest difference. It's your biggest challenge. In fact, it's probably the biggest one anytime you move country and pick up a new culture. Um, you go through a period of rapid adjustment because you have to. It's your job to be able to go in and relate to your students. So whether it's Europe, whether it's Southeast Asia, that's always going to be your first focus is your students. So you need to find out about the culture as quickly as you can, and assimilate as much of that as you can, because it's going to help you in your job. It's going to make your job less stressful. it's going to make you a better teacher as well. Because once your students start relating to you, you're building trust. And once you have their trust, they'll do anything that you say because they believe you're going to teach them English. They're going to be able to get to the level of English they want at the end of whatever period you're teaching them. Okay. Um, I think I've pretty much covered most of Europe. Are there any particular questions that you want to ask about working in any of the countries that we've gone through? Job advertisements in Spain. You can have a look at our website, have a look at TEFL.ie, have a look at the jobs board. You can also have a look at TEFL.com, TEFL.com. They're not affiliated with us, but they've been around a long time and they do have a lot of jobs around Spain. Advice about budgeting as a TEFL teacher in a new country. Now that is a great question. I'm sorry I didn't even think of putting that in there. Generally speaking, it's a little bit of research, Pam. Um, when you're going to a country, I always say try to bring 2 months, the equivalent of 2 months of your pay with you. Okay. Um, Now the thing here is, there is a caveat with it, but generally schools are extremely supportive of the new teacher coming in. They realize they know they've been doing this years, they've had new teachers all the time. So they will be very cognizant of the fact that you're not going to know how much of everything you're going to need and what things cost. But let's say I'm going to take an example. If you're going to Spain and your salary is, let's say, €1,300, okay, I would tend to bring between two and 2,500 with me as a backup. Um, the schools will quite often sub money in advance. I don't like going that route. I think you're better off to stand on your own 2 feet initially because it's going to give you a better sense of what things cost, and B, you don't want to be on the back foot for 6 months trying to pay that money back. So I've never used as much as I've taken, but I've always liked knowing I have it. So I would bring between 2,500 if my pay is around the 1,200, 1,300 mark. That allows me then to exist for the first month. I can pay my rent, I can pay my bills because if my salary is, let's say, 1,300, that has to be enough to survive. There will always be the extra little things. You may find an apartment and it's missing some pots and pans, or you might like to buy a small armchair that you prefer, or whatever. There's always going to be a little extra expense. But that is a great question. You're the biggest resource you are ever going to have in TEFL, and I mean this. It's the other teachers. They will be your biggest source of information and support. They will tell you exactly how much things will cost, how much you need to budget, the things you need to watch out for, and it could be something silly like taking the number 6 bus instead of taking the number 7 bus because the number 7 bus is an express and it costs €10 to get where you're going, whereas the other bus will only cost you 250. It sounds silly, but these are the things you know nothing about and you need to find out quickly because you will overspend very quickly. Um, so in terms of budgeting, bring twice your salary if you have it or as close to it as you can. But ask the other teachers, what do things cost? Where's the best supermarket? Where's the best place to buy the cheapest but good quality fruit and veg or meat? Or what's the best bus, or how much should a taxi cost in case I'm getting ripped off, or how do I ask how much is anything like that? The teachers will talk to you. They will give you a list of stuff that will save you a lot of money. Okay. Uh, Any difference between short-term, long-term contracts and visas? Uh, there generally won't be. I would be surprised in terms of a visa. Um, I think it would be unlikely that a school or an employer would actually go to the trouble of getting a short-term visa for a teacher. There would be exceptions where, there are certain visas you can get, which would be the sort of high-end professionals, IT, finance, and so on, who need to come and work for 2, 3, 4 months on a project, let's say, with one of the big multinationals. You generally won't get short-term contracts teaching English because the schools, and I meant to put this earlier, the schools will run from mid-September to the end of June as a rule. End of June is when the Cambridge exams generally, that's the big date for them. Um, so the schools close off at the end of June, and then they're gone July and August, and the first part of September they're back in getting everything ready for the new school year. Um, Again, job adverts, TEFL.com, or have a look at our own web. You'll find different times of the year. This is the other thing. There are ebbs and flows on these jobs. European job, the European job market. When you're looking for jobs to teach in Spain, Italy, Portugal, Spain, France, start looking. If you're thinking of working, let's say September 2027, start looking in February because the schools will know pretty certain after Christmas, and after Christmas, certainly before Easter time, maybe March, April at the absolute latest, whether or not the teacher or teachers they have are going to come back for the following year. Okay, so they will start looking from February and March onwards. The sooner you get your application in, the sooner they'll have a look at it, and the more you're going to stand out. Okay, a school will be quite happy to get to the end of June knowing they already have their teacher for September, because a lot of the schools in Europe will close down, but they take students to Ireland and the UK for summertime. So it's not like they have 2.5 months off at the beach. They're very, very busy during this time. And quite frequently, they just don't have time to interview teachers. So if you can get in between that February to June window, that would be the best time to start applying for jobs in Europe. Okay. Occasionally, you will find jobs advertised for January. Normally, that tends to be a case where a teacher has not returned after the Christmas break to teach at the school, which always, there's a potential red flag. Was the school that bad? Or perhaps was the teacher that bad the school asked them not to come back? So I wouldn't let it put you off, but I would do due diligence in January if the jobs are there January, February, and just ask how come there's a position free, because you don't want to have to fly out for the sake of 6 months and find you've got a bit of a duff job. Okay, and never be afraid to ask for your contract in advance and have it checked out. Okay. Um, Canada, USA, Albania. I don't know the answer to that question, Rachel. It's just somebody from the US told me about it. But I would imagine it would also include Canada, because I know that they're looking for people to go and build a country for them. Well, sorry, that's insulting. Not to build a country for them, but to help them build a country, and especially when it comes to language and language teachers. Um, what else have we got? Aman, you've completed the 120-hour TEFL course. Will you get a job easily? That's a very tough question to answer. It's like any other training, Aman. It's really going to be down to how much legwork you do. I always say to people, keep applying. And if you apply to 99 jobs and you get turned down, go for the 100, because that's the one you might get. There really is no easy way to say that, because all the schools that have different requirements, they have different backgrounds, they'll have different perceptions, they will have their own criteria as to what they're looking for. So if you've done 120-hour, but you come from a business background, they might go, great, we just happen to be looking for a business English teacher and you're just the person for the job. So sometimes it's just pot luck, but persistency is what's going to get you there. Just be persistent, keep applying until you get something. Don't take a no as an absolute. Keep going with the applications, okay? Teaching online, does it make a difference for individual classes? The only real one there, Jonathan, and I'm assuming you're talking about teaching European students. Feel free to pop something in there if I'm wrong. Um, It doesn't really make a difference, other than again, it's going to be a cultural thing. Some people will have certain ways of learning. Um, Again, it's a north-south divide and a false one, but generally you'll find German students will very often be quite grammar focused. Whereas a student from, let's say, Spain would be more into content and speaking practice, and they'll pick the grammar up at another point. Um, it's a broad kind of brushstroke, but no, in terms of online, and I've taught and I've actually done teacher training online, and I was very surprised at how effective it was. Um, but you will find it'll always come back to one thing, Jonathan, no matter you're online or in a classroom, it's going to come back to you gaining the students' trust. Without that, forget it. Cut them loose, find somebody, you can work with, and don't feel offended if a student just says, I don't think this is working. It could be their learning style, your teaching style. They just clash. That happens. It could just be something about the way the lessons are going that they mightn't feel they're ready for it. It doesn't mean you're a bad teacher, but it will always come down to gaining the students' trust and earning it and keeping it. Once you do that, you'll find a working relationship no matter what the cultural difference or expectations are. Okay. Interview process, does it vary? Very much so. Very much so. Um, I mean, my job in Portugal, going back to the day I hand wrote a letter, hand wrote one back. And then we had one phone call, and it was on a Monday evening on a very rainy day in Ireland. And he asked me to go and work for him. And I asked him when he wanted me there, and he said Wednesday. And I told him I was washing my hair that day, but I could get there on Friday, which I duly did. Um, I had longer hair in those days, by the way, so it did take a day or two to get it dry. Um, so the interview process very different these days. You may get a Zoom call quite frequently. That's how people will do it these days. It could be an interview. Um, I'd be surprised if there isn't some sort of connection, either phone or Zoom call or a WhatsApp video chat sort of thing. Um, it's there. People like to see the teachers who are going to turn up. And a video chat like that for a minute or two or 5 minutes, it's a great chance for you to put yourself forward for a job. Because what schools want is commitment, enthusiasm, professionalism. This is going to sound strange, cleanliness, um, and obviously to be an effective teacher. But a video call is a great chance to put that across. So yeah, it varies, but the what they're looking for pretty much doesn't. It's always going to be one of those or all of those together. Do you need to be competent in the native language of the country you want to work in? Absolutely not. My first job was in Turkey. I didn't have a word of Turkish, unless you count kebab. Um, I know I didn't live on them. I did learn a lot of Turkish words after, mostly about food, but no, you don't. Remember, you're there. Excuse me, you're there to teach English. Nobody's going to learn English if you're going to start in a classroom in Madrid speaking Spanish. And I keep going back to, if you think back to your school days, whether you studied French, German, Spanish, Italian, Greek, or whatever language, you think about how many years you spent doing it and how fluent you were at the end. um, my bet was your teacher probably spoke an awful lot of the native language rather than the one you were trying to learn. So no, absolutely not. Don't let that stop you applying for anywhere. Will we have a seminar on the UAE soon? Not with me. I'm not an expert on the UAE at all. I have general knowledge on it, but we could certainly have a look at it and see if we can build something together. We do have a couple of people who would know a bit more than I do about that area. Do you need to wait for the working visa before applying jobs? If you have a passport, you actually need the job offer first, Jackie. Unfortunately, since Brexit, it's the same rules. The only way, as I said before, if you can check through Ancestry, maybe you have EU citizenship through Ancestry, but generally the employer has to sponsor it, so you have to have a job offer. Um, There may be ways around it, unless, for example, if you were a UK citizen living within the EU before, I think it was December 2021, you would still have the right of residency to remain and stay living in the country and work in it. Okay. Um, older adults, are there age requirements? Another great question, and one that's very often asked. I'll go back to Turkey. My first year teaching, one of my colleagues was 74, wonderful old English lady, um, and another English lady was 68. So yes, there will be cutoffs, and again, it goes back to, and I can't remember. I think maybe it was Jonathan asked the question about interviews. Are they all the same, or do they vary? It goes back to the same thing. The school will have certain requirements. A lot of the schools, I say in the south, they will have a lot of younger children, and they do need a lot of activities. If they look purely at age, they might go, "Oh no, you can't do that. You're too old." However, if you manage to get an interview and there's a video and you can demonstrate that you're perfectly fine working with kids, maybe you have, the experience of raising kids, or you have grandkids who are that age, bring it into the conversation. Because all of that is going to count. What they want is enthusiasm, ability, consistency. They just want to see people eager to get in and teach, regardless of the age. Um, September 20, excuse me, September 26 jobs. No, it's not too late. If they're advertising, apply. It's just that there will probably be fewer September jobs now than there would have been maybe a month ago. But no, there's still plenty of jobs in June. As I say, it's that kind of, sorry, July, it's that sort of February to June, end of June windows when it's maxed. But there are plenty of schools who have left it, until the end of the year because they thought a teacher was coming back and now they're not. They may have extra students, so there will always be jobs. Like my job in Portugal, I actually went out at the start of November, which is extremely odd. Um, but then so was my boss. And he won't mind me saying that. But he just needed somebody to run a small school and sort of split shift. So I was working in two different towns, 30 kilometers apart. And he couldn't find anyone foolish enough to do it until he met me. So no, keep going. You keep searching for jobs. If they're advertised, for heaven's sake, please, apply for them. Even if you don't fit the bill, apply for them, because you'll never know, who it is that you're applying to. There may be just something in your letter or your CV, and they're going to go, "Oh, great." Okay. So don't rule it out, even if you don't meet all the criteria. Most job advertisements, and it's not just in TEFL, but it's most of the job advertisements you see, and the requirements or criteria, unless it's a visa, they just tend to be a wish list. It's a shopping list. This is what they'd really love. But if they have somebody who's really good and they don't tick all the boxes, they're happy. So, go for the jobs. Um, so older adults, September, in Moldova. I would say Moldova is probably, again, a little bit like Albania in that they are looking for people. I don't know what the visa requirement is in Moldova, but I would say it's probably far less strict than the EU. Even though I know it is a candidate country for EU membership, none of the visa restrictions would apply on Moldova yet. So I would say yes, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, I can think of two people I know who qualified and went to Moldova. One I know definitely got a job out there. Um, so again, go on to TEFL.com, have a look at our own website, TEFL.ie, have a look for jobs in Moldova. If there's nothing listed, Google English language schools in Moldova, and never ever be afraid. This is across the board, not just Moldova. Never be afraid. If you know you're going to be in a country and a certain area, never be afraid to approach schools directly, even if they haven't advertised a job. Okay. I've been a director of studies. We're well used to getting emails, phone calls out of the blue asking, "Have you got any jobs going? I'm moving over to the country, or I'd like to work there," or whatever. So don't be put off just because they're not advertising. A director of studies, if they like your CV, they'll keep it. They will keep it on file. It's not the old thing of my filing cabinet is my bin. A good CV they'll keep because it will save them a lot of hassle when they need a teacher the next time around. Okay. Can I get a teaching job as a Nigerian? Yes, it'll really come down to you if you feel your English is up to it. Generally speaking, C1. There's no reason why you can't get jobs as a Nigerian teaching. My advice, if you're finding it difficult, go online. Okay. Any experience that you get, whether it's online, volunteering in a local community centre, anything you can get, um, put it on your CV. It'll count. Okay. It'll show enthusiasm, which is one of the big things, but it'll also give you a chance to use what you've learned on the course, and it'll cut your teeth in a classroom setting, whether it's online or face to face. Okay. English teacher job, EU and New Zealand. Uh, I have 23 years experience in technical writing, worked in the USA, New Zealand, a permanent resident. Uh, as a permanent resident, and they would have Welsh, it's English, literature, university, Sweden, British Council, TEFL. Um, Vinny, I'm just wondering, are you prepare yourself for an English teacher job in the EU and New Zealand? I'm taking if you're a permanent resident of either. Um, it, regardless, to be honest, whether you still have whether you have citizenship on either of the countries or you still have your Indian citizenship, it'll be pretty much the same rule as everybody else. You've got to apply for the job, get a job offer, and then apply for the visa. Okay. Now, there are several other ways in with visas. There's sort of high-end blue chip type visas. There's the digital nomad visa, which some countries will allow you to work in the country as a digital nomad. However, you've got to have proof that your pay is going to cover everything. Um, and most times you need private health insurance as well because you won't have access to the local health system. Okay. So pretty much the same thing there, Vinny, on those. Uh, yes, Jackie, your doorbell rang. That is always going to happen when you ask a question on these things. Believe me. Yeah, you can watch it back on the recording. Um, we'll send out the link to the recording, so don't worry. Yeah, first time teaching. Do I have to prepare materials too? No. If you're working for a school, you will have a stocked staff room. And again, I will go back to the other teachers, get your lesson plan together, but don't be afraid to ask for help. Show them your lesson plan. Ask them if they think it'll work. Ask them for other materials. They have an absolute wealth of knowledge. They will be able to pull things out of the drawers and the shelves and the computers and just make your life a lot easier. It'll be a steep learning curve, but a really good one for you. So no, you don't have to normally prepare materials unless it's extra material to a course book. Most schools will follow a standard curriculum. They will have a favorite sort of course book. It could be a Cambridge book, a Cambridge series. It could be an Oxford series, a Macmillan series. That will determine your lessons as you go through each day of class. Your job is to make sure you have your lesson plan. If you need extra materials, it might be something like flashcards. It could be something, on a screen. It could be a listening exercise. That's where your extra materials come in. But don't be afraid to ask the other teachers. Okay. Um, are there any specific organizations that cater to candidates that need to be sponsored? Not to my knowledge, Maddie. I would be I would say probably it's going to be the legal profession will be doing something. Um, but I'd be very wary of any agencies that charge money for things like this. I would do your homework on it. Your best bet, and this is across the board for anybody out there, if you're thinking of going to a country within Europe, contact the embassy in your home country. So if you're going to Germany, contact the German embassy, Spain, Spanish embassy, and so on. They will give you the real accurate way to do things. Um, they may even flag that there are certain organizations that you shouldn't go near. Okay. Secondary English language license. Was there a beginning teacher with no classroom experience? Okay, that's a great question, Lee. Um, to be quite honest, the vast majority of teachers who finish courses have no experience. That's why they do a course. Schools are well aware of it. And this is why I say that little list at the start, it's a shopping list. Okay. It's a wish list. Preferred 2 years experience, essential 1 year's experience. Someone somewhere has to give you that first bit of experience. Okay. Um, there's no country, there's no programs, there's no set pathway to answer that question. The place that's going to give you the experience is the one you chase down. And that's why I say apply for everything. Don't worry about whether you meet all the criteria or not. Okay. Um, just go first. The schools are well aware that most teachers in TEFL coming through are going to be new. Just started the 180-hour homeschooling, right, teaching with children, mainly in Turkey. Yeah. Lily, I would say TEFL.com again, or our own site, TEFL.ie. This is where you find most of these jobs. But as I said before, if you're in a particular location in Turkey or you want to go to Turkey, um, Google Google the schools in the area where you're at or where you're going, and don't be afraid to apply to them. And certainly, if you've been homeschooling for a year, put that in a CV, mention that at an interview or on the phone when you're talking to people, because there are transferable skills there. Okay. Um, you can speak some Russian, uh, Moldovan, never Moldovan contact, Russian wife. Yeah. Um, like if you have the first language of a country, it makes it easier in terms of the culture and the integration part. Um, but as I said before, I would avoid at all costs bringing the first language into the classroom itself. Okay. Um, it doesn't do your students any good. Um, Any trusted websites, platforms, organizations that regularly post legitimate teaching vacancies. Again, I'll go back to TEFL.com, our own one, TEFL.ie. Um, there's the ESL Cafe, E for Echo, S for Sierra, L for Lima Cafe. They quite often have job postings, tend to be American focused. So if you're in the States and you're looking for work, perhaps in South America, Central America, a lot of their jobs. They also post quite a few for Japan and China as well. Um, Online platform jobs, funding, reliable non-scale vacancies in Europe. To be honest, Lee, I'd say there really aren't that many scam vacancies in teaching English because it wouldn't make a lot of sense. Like, like there's nobody going to charge you um, for finding a job when you can go and find a job yourself online. So if anybody tries to charge you for finding a job, that's probably a scam. Um, why should somebody charge you and say, "Look, here's a job you could have found yourself. I'll take $20 or $200." Um, it wouldn't make any sense. So again, go back to the main course, TEFL.ie, TEFL.com, ESL Cafe. There are quite a few good, well-established websites dealing with TEFL, ESL, ESOL, call it what you will. You can check them. You can check the reviews on them. Um, I was a moderator on ESL Cafe for quite a while myself many years ago. They've been around a long time. I think it used to be called Dave's ESL Cafe. So yeah, there's some good ones out there. Good market Southern Europe for one-to-one ESL tutoring. There is a market. It depends on what you mean by good. Um, if the price is right, Pam is the answer. A lot of these things will come down to price. Um, Generally speaking, for the teacher, um, you need to make a living. You can't be teaching, at $5 an hour, €10 an hour. on one-to-one because you'd need to teach so many hours, you just explode at the end of the month. Um, so I would say yes, there is a market. But my thing is rather than focusing on an area for one-to-one, if it's online, the world's your oyster. And I tend to say, think about your own past, your own experience. How do you make a niche for yourself? So when I was doing full time, I would have done, um, I would say I have business and technical would have been my two sort of specialist areas. And then I was also Cambridge and I was an examiner for Cambridge. Dave's Cafe, a lot of scams, uploaded my resume, got hit with a lot of scammers, had to pull my resume. Yeah, unfortunately, that wouldn't be Dave's Cafe's problem. Um, that's one of those things where these guys will just send the bots out and they'll just troll every single place where you put your resume. I don't put resumes up like that for people to browse. I don't think it's a good idea. Um, my thing about going onto those sites, like the site itself, is perfectly sound. People who use it, unfortunately, they can't stop everybody. But what I would find is that the jobs at particular schools are good. If there's an agency involved, I would do my due diligence and check out the legitimacy of any agency before sending anything to them or talking to them. Um, frankly, I don't see the need for an agency. If you can get into a country, without a visa, or you can get a visa relatively easily, and you meet the criteria, the school deal with the school directly. Most of these schools can't afford agencies. That's just being honest. Why would they pay a small fortune and then have to? Okay, guys, bear with me. I think I may have one other thing I need to just pop up here. My entire system is a bit slow here today. Here we go. Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to have to close and run. But what I am going to ask you to do, if you would very kindly, I'm just popping a little link in the bottom here. Um, if you wouldn't mind posting a review of the seminar today, your opinions, that all be very welcome. Um, certainly, you'll be getting a link anyway back to um, the webinar. So if you need to look at it again, feel free. If you could put up with me for 2 hours, that would be quite miraculous in its own right. But feel free to do it. And I've just popped my email address in here as well. So if you have any um, issues, if you have any other questions you'd like follow up on, bear with me because I usually end up getting inundated after webinars. So it does take me a little bit of time to get through them all, but I will get back to you, okay? If you have no other questions, then I wish you all the best in whatever courses you're doing, whatever job search you're on. Just remember, don't take no as an absolute no. Keep applying, keep looking out, look at the feedback, adapt your CV for each job you go for, and the very best of luck with it wherever you end up teaching. Okay.